is off the hook. Something going on, but we talking about Flukey Stokes today. Sometimes I hate to see the phone ring, so thank goodness. We're talking some Chicago history. I'm gonna say hello to everybody and bring up the guests. We shouldn't have any problems over here, Cynthia. They gonna be like, "Oh, Berg talking about something educational." Hey, everybody. Oh, oh my goodness. Hello, everybody. Let me bring up Gardis Watts and Big Mike. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking some Chicago history and Flukey Stokes. I actually don't even know if I have the right Flukey Stokes because I did my research and his son, I'm going to bring them up. Bringing up Gardis and Big Mike. Hi, Gardis. Hi, Big Mike.
Hello, everybody.
It's good to see you. Are you there, Big Mike?
Yeah, sorry about that. I had my phone on mute.
Oh no, you good. You good. Good evening, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me today to educate me as well because I was looking up Fluky Stokes and I thought this whole time he was the one buried in the Cadillac and I had it all wrong. So I'm gonna let you guys give us a little history on Chicago, Fluky Stokes, maybe a little gang culture and politics and how that all meshes together.
I'll let you go first, Big Mike.
Sorry about that. Something just come up on my screen. Can you repeat the question? I apologize.
Oh no, you're good. With Fluky Stokes, this is the subject today, but how does Chicago gang culture, his influence in Chicago and politics, it's like all wrapped up together.
Hmm.
So I just want to have a discussion about that and we could kind of like freeform it however way you guys would like to go.
Sure. So, so Flukey Stokes was a drug dealer on the south side of Chicago, and he actually had structure over his drug empire because he would never give anybody more dope than other people that he had selling dope for him. It was always the same amount for everybody, and you won't get new dope until you already sold the ones you already have. He had the police department in the back pocket, Unit 7 police department, which is the police station that is off of 51st and Wentworth. And that police station used to be the one for Robert Taylor Homes off of 51st and Federal, which was Flukey's main locations for when he sold when his people sold dope. So it flew up all the way to the top. So the public housing or CHA, for example, was run by this guy by the name of Charles Weibel. Charles Weibel ran the CHA, but he also knew that Flukey was running this drug empire. And I can't prove this, and I don't think a lot of people can. But if, in my opinion, I felt like Flukey was paying him off, just like he was paying to the police department, the police officers, because anybody that was getting ready to snitch on one of um, his workers, he always had the people that was going to testify in court against this person or that person, and they would be retaliated against. And so Fluky was a major empire, ran a major drug empire. And then when he was shot and killed back in 1986, I believe off of 79th and Calumet, that's when a lot of the gangs started to compete for that drug market, especially in the Robert Taylor homes.
Wow.
But so Charles Weibel was over the CHA in the 1980s. He actually got convicted, I believe, he got convicted in federal court. I forgot what it was though, but then they brought in this guy named Vincent Lane, and Vincent Lane came in and actually um, wanted to do sweeps throughout the public housing projects because around the late 1980s to like the mid 1990s, you had a lot of gang wars, and a lot of it has to do with them fighting over the drug market. And I had mentioned in the comments, what was it, last week, that the gangs were run like corporations, and that you may have, cocaine, I should say, sold on the third floor. You may have heroin sold on the fifth floor, and then you may have all your other drugs sold on the eighth floor. I'm just giving an example, but that's how structured these gangs ran their operation. And so Vincent Lane came in and actually did sweeps, and the residents sued him, and I believe they won because it violated their constitutional rights of searches and seizures, the Fourth Amendment. And when he passed on, when Flukey Stokes was murdered, which I think he was set up by his bodyguard, um, I I think that's what led to a lot of turf wars.
Wow. And as soon as you put up Vincent Lane, I don't know if I have the right one here.
That's him.
Uh,
That's
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 him.
him. That's him.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, CHA comes right up.
Hmm.
And it was a lot of conspiracies about Fluky Stokes' death, and we'll get to that. But to see how, like you're explaining, how structured gangs were and the business of selling, I guess, drugs or whatever, it was like it was very organized. Like that's crazy.
It's not like it
Um.
is today, where
Mm-hmm.
today, and I study a lot of gang culture.
Mm-hmm.
Today reminds the Chicago gangs today reminds me of LA gangs, where you have street factions going up against other street factions. That's how a lot of the Chicago gangs are today, and that had a lot to do with a lot of the gang leaders in Chicago getting hit with RICO charges and being sent to ADX in Florence, Colorado, which is their underground most secured prison in the world, I believe. Actually, no, I wouldn't say in the world, but in the United States, in the Western world, I should say, in the Western world. And so, what happened was the gangs ended up being splintered, and factions started to rise because you had people trying to compete for the number one spot.
Who would be his competition?
Who Flukies?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would say, the I would say that I wouldn't say he had no competition. I would just say that it was, I would say probably like other gangs that were against
Mm-hmm.
his operation will probably compete against him, but it was very difficult to compete against Fluky when he had the police in the back pocket, and he also had members of the CHA also in the back pocket.
Yeah, I could bet. Um, do you know anything about? I was reading because I don't know much about him, but they were saying he was also into bootlegging.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay, I was like, how could that be? So back in that time, it was like a bootleg situation going on. Okay, did you like to add anything, Gardis?
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off of what Big Mike said, probably the biggest drug dealer that came out of Chicago, had a structured organization that, even though he was based on the South Side, it basically spanned kind of citywide when you
Hmm.
think about his operation. Um, I look at Fluky as a mixture of Nicky Barnes from Harlem and Melvin Williams from Baltimore. Two people who kind of like, he was flashy, but he was not as flashy as Nicky Barnes. But then he had the business mindset of like a Melvin Williams. So that's who kind of like Flukey Stokes reminds me of. And just like Big Mike said, he had a lot of policemen in his pocket. Many times they were allowed to they allowed him to have his drug runners kind of roam freely around, and if somebody gets pulled over, he just references, they work for Flukey, and they would get let go. And so, Flukey also too was a gambler. And this is what he always says publicly about his money, because when people ask him, how he make his money, and he always says, like, I never taken a drink, I never did any drugs or anything like that. And he claims that he gets all his money off of gambling. And I mean, we all know, that wasn't true, but he got a lot of media attention as well. So that's why many media people, many media personalities would interview him. He was always frequent in Jet and Ebony magazine, but they would never label him a drug dealer, for some reason or another, because Flukey was, like I said, he was very flamboyant, very flashy, as you see as a result of his son and himself. He both buried in Cadillac coffins, and from my understanding, those Cadillac coffins actually had like white wall wheels, turn signals. The car, the coffin can actually drive, that type of thing. So, yeah, he would always be flamboyant about his stuff. I believe it was in '85. Flukey threw an anniversary party, 30th wedding anniversary party for many of his friends and close associates. Spent around, if I remember, it was like $200,000 for a 30th wedding anniversary, and he he had people like the Shy Lights perform. He had another group there too. It'll come to my mind, but he always had, he always hobnob with the big with big stars, because you will find him you'll find pictures of him with Muhammad Ali and several other big name celebrities. Staple Singers was there. Little Dalton history too. But Staple Singers, Shy Lights, and at that wedding party, he was stuffing $50 and $100 bills in the guests' pockets as well. But that was basically his style as far as living the life of a rich drug dealer, because with him, he felt like he was untouchable, just like with Nicky Barnes, because of the fact that he was paying policemen and had several officials, like I think Big Mike said, the CHA guy and judges in his back pocket. So when you have that type of flamboyant lifestyle, sometimes you could rest easy, but that also makes you an easy target as well. Because when his son died in I believe it was at '84, his son, they call him he was also Willie Stokes Jr., but they call him the Wimp. He died, and this is the thing, because Big Mike brought up a big point. His organization was very structured, and it was somewhat successful because Flukey in the beginning rarely used violence. I mean, he used violence, but it was not how should I put it? It was very thought out, and it was sometimes last resort where he had to use violence. So Flukey was able to be successful because of the fact that violence wasn't always the first resolution for him. He would always try to negotiate, payoffs or whatever. Unfortunately, he did have to come to the gun, but he didn't live by the gun up until his son died. And when his son died, because he was violently killed, Willie the Wimp was killed as well. That's when Flukey started to use more hitmen, use more enforcers, and then he, like 2 years later, after his son had got killed, he was unfortunately tragically killed. And so when you think about what happened with Flukey after his death, because you had mentioned about enemies or rivals. Well, there was one guy named Chuck McFerrin who was considered kind of like an enemy of Flukey, because McFerrin, who was also a drug dealer himself, basically made a deal with this guy named Pedro Rodriguez, who was kind of like a distributor. He was actually a distributor to Flukey. And McFerrin was basically trying to cut a deal with the distributors to just, sell majority of the dope to him. So he was kind of like one of the guys who kind of vied for control when Flukey had died. You also had a guy named Gordon Chip Battle, who was actually Flukey's former partner, who tried to wrestle control because he controlled a lot of the low end in Chicago. And then you had another guy named Sam Love Jr., who was a former associate of Flukey, but he was also part of the Black Pea Stone Rangers as well. So he kind of spent off to his own when the Black Pea Stone Rangers get into the drug game. That's where he started kind of like associate himself with that as well. So, with that being said, with Flukey, and Big Mike had said it, the drug game got a little more dirtier, very violent, because of the fact that you had figures that actually came out. Even though Larry Hoover was incarcerated, he had lieutenants on the street basically organizing the Gangster Disciples. And me growing up on the South Side, I was basically in neighborhoods where the Gangster Disciples actually lived at. So with that being said, it was somewhat structured because of the fact that Hoover had these lieutenants. We actually called them governors, and they would be in control of particular areas. Like there was this one guy we called Pops, and he was basically in charge of the area I was at that I grew up in. It was Morgan Park. And so Pops was basically the guy you go to, as the leader, if you want to like get into the game, call for a hit or whatever, you have to go to Pops first. So Pops was the one controlling everything. And then, as Big Mike said, when the federal charges started coming around in like 94, 95, Pops got locked up. But Pops never had a successor, which none of these guys had successors. Because they basically, what they did was they just rounded up the leaders, but the foot soldiers were still on the streets, the guns were still on the streets, and the drugs were still on the streets. So then, just like that, a neighborhood that had 2 gangs now has 10 gangs, and everybody has different agendas. So now you got this fight over who's going to control the territory, who's going to control the drugs. So, the result of I think it all turned when Flukey's son got killed. And then for me, I think the flood of violence over drugs started to ramp up significantly, because we're talking about like going into the late 80s and early 90s is when the murder rates started to really skyrocket. But what was so interesting is, Chicago got ignored a lot because of the fact that everybody had attention on LA. LA was the hot topic during that time, because in LA, with the Bloods and the Crips going on, it was like thousands and thousands of murders every year in Los Angeles. So I think Chicago got overlooked during that time because everybody was so focused on LA. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of like a start rundown of the legacy of Flukey Stokes.
I I agree with you on everything you said. But one thing that you mentioned, you forgot, not forgot, but you had mentioned that he has the business mind of Malcolm Williams. Um, I, I I think he has the business mind of Alpo Martinez from Harlem.
Okay, I can see that.
Because I really think that if Fluky hadn't been murdered, which I still believe that he was set up, I think he would have been hit with RICO charges if he would have lived.
Yeah, and Fluky, the interesting thing about Fluky is, he died at 48. How many drug dealers live that long, and especially so deep into that into the game as Fluky was? So when most drug dealers, they don't live that long, or they get pinched, and up until his death, uh, he was arrested 70 times, but spent a total of 1 year in jail in his whole lifetime. So
Was that before RICO? Because the part of the reason why they developed the RICO statute is so that they could go after gang leaders who order hits on rivals.
I think that was before RICO.
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay.
and so the gang violence
Mhm.
in the housing projects, with they basically locked up the leaders, and basically I look at it as you cut off the head of an organization, and now everybody's competing with each other to be the head of that organization, which calls for a lot of violence to increase. Um, and It wasn't until the murder of what's his name, Dantrell Davis in Cabrini Green back in '92, October of '92, I believe. My memory serves me correctly, where the attention started to hit Chicago uh, in terms of dealing with the gang problem, and then a whole slew of things happened. HUD took over CHA, and Mayor Daley did a deal with CHA. Well, not CHA. I'm sorry, HUD, which was this happened out under the Clinton administration, where he created the plan for transformation, and I think we all know what that is today. Mixed use income homes, and tearing down the high rises and giving people vouchers to move in places like Dalton, for example.
yeah, you're right.
That's very true.
Yeah, it's very much true. Also, and I'm glad you mentioned Dantrell Davis, because another murder in the 90s that made a significant turn was what is that young man's name? Um,
Yummy Sandifer.
Yummy Sanford. Yes. So Yummy Sanford was killed in 1994. Uh, he was actually 12, I think, either 11 or 12 years old. Was if I can remember, he was a BD, Black Disciple, or part of the Black Disciples, or running with the Black Disciples during that time. At that point in his life, he was already picked up several times. I mean, at 11 years old or 12 years old, he had a rap sheet very long. And what ended up happening was he was attempting to kill a rival gang member and accidentally shot a little girl. and there was a serious manhunt for Yummy Sandiford. And when they finally found him, he was dead in the alley, uh, somewhere in the viaducts. If I can remember, was it 80? It was in the 80s or the hundreds. I can't remember.
It was
But
in
It's
the
in the
hundred.
hundreds.
yeah, but all I know is at where I was living at, it wasn't too far from where I was living at. So they found him dead because his associates had killed him. Um, Many people have several theories about that. Um, and one that I had just learned recently, and I can't remember that young girl's name that he shot, but apparently she was the niece of a gang chief, and because of the fact that Yummy shot him, they wanted his head for that, and I guess the crew that Yummy was running with, they had to get rid of him because of the fact that they had too much heat on them.
Which
Because
they did them dirty. They did them dirty.
yeah, they did, but I say that because during the time of Flukey Stokes, kids didn't handle the guns. A lot of his enforcement and hitmen were grown men. You know, he hardly had any kids working for him like that. If I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, Big Mike. But
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
many of the people that worked for him were grown
Working.
men.
Mm-hmm. They were
So
adult.
yeah, so they handled the dope, they handled the guns, they handled all of that stuff, and this was kind of like turning into something more crazier when you started having, you know, the children doing hits and making calls on who they're going to shoot. So Yummy was kind of like the first example of a young man who was part of a gang who was holding a piece, because even when I was going to even when I was in high school in the late 80s, early 90s, I mean, there were kids my age who were runners, but rarely did any of them have a gun. And so you start to see the shooters get younger and younger, which today now you see shooters as young as 12 years old, doing hits. So it's a stark contrast from where Fluky was when he organized his crime organization, where adults were were the shooters. Because if you have a grown man who is somewhat trained in arms, you have less unnecessary casualties. Because that was the thing about gang wars back then. uh, Most of the time the targets were actually the rival gang people. You had a lot of murders, but rarely did you see people, kids or anything getting killed. Because I could specifically remember playing ball at Ada Park one day, and some of the OGs came up to us and told us, "Y'all need to go home." And when they said that, that means something's about to happen. So they allowed the children to go home. And then next day we find out there was a shooting that happened at the basketball courts. So that was
Mm.
that was how the gangs actually had a code of keeping the children and the women, out of range. But nowadays you don't see that anymore.
Very true. And I have a going back to Yummy Sandifer, Dalton connection. I don't know if Big Mike knew Mr. Howard, George Howard, and I think he was the Shaw's lawyers, and he defended um Craig Hardaway. I think he was the one that pulled the trigger on Yummy, and it was a big thing in Dalton at that time. People would say, "Oh, Mr. Howard, he was involved in that Yummy Sandifer case, and he was an attorney for a lot of the gangs in Chicago."
The 19 so that during that time, The gangs were starting to use young kids or kids, for example, to create to do these murders because if they were getting caught, they wouldn't get the life sentence.
Mm.
So they use kids to do the hit. And in Yummy's case, the BDs actually ordered him to hit a an opposition, an op, right? He missed and he hit somebody that was not the target. The gang leader comes back and tells them that well they need to get rid of him, and then they kill him. They kill Yummy for what they ordered him to do. That's why I said they did him dirty.
Mm. Mm. And from what we're going back to like the Fluky situation, it seems like it was nowadays it's no code or organization. It's just everyone for their self. I guess.
Well, you have kids running organizations, and when you have kids with that are running things and they don't have no structure, then it's chaos. See, a lot of people. So you have to understand too that back in those days, a lot of the Chicago business um, community, or like the business community, kept blacks out. So a lot of times, the businessmen had to these drug dealers. They became businessmen, and they went out and they sold dope. They did all of those things. It's not like it is today, where you know people are the companies are trying to promote diversity. I mean, there's a reason why when like when these housing projects were up, that you can step into one and you rarely see a white face other than a police officer. There, I actually ran into somebody who used to live in, actually, yeah, used to live in like, what was it, Stateway? And actually, I didn't just run into them. I used to talk to them back in the 90s. And I remember her telling me she never went downtown, never seen it. She's seen pictures, but never went downtown Chicago.
From Stateway?
Yeah, they lived in the
Wow.
projects. They never went downtown Chicago. They never went. They stayed there. That's all. And then they went to the stores around there. The kids went to, or her kids went to DuSable High School off of 47th and State. But yeah, I mean,
Mm.
and they will go to the currency exchange off 47th to cash their checks. The checks they get from the government.
And just to put it into perspective, that's like Stateway was like on 35th Street, like 35th and State.
Hmm.
Right? And so not far from downtown, but that's sort of like the college over there, University IIT, how it
Hmm.
was in the middle of Stateway and the Ickies, but they didn't accept any of the kids to any programs, or did they recruit any of the kids for any of their programs right there in the neighborhood. But people came from all over the world to that school.
Yep. And same thing with the University of Chicago. Like University of Chicago is in Hyde Park, not too far from Robert Taylor. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but there was a time when University of Chicago created their own urban renewal program, which was designed to remove, they call it blighted areas, but it's another way of them saying they want to remove low income blacks the from the Hyde Park area and push them all the way to where the Robert Taylor homes were.
This is interesting because I wonder like how that affected the suburbs. I remember knowing people as soon as they were going to close the projects, um, they got vouchers to move like to
Hmm.
Dalton, Park Forest,
Yep.
Riverdale. I think it's only one project left in Chicago. Is that all Dale, right?
Well, you have the Dearborn homes. They're redeveloping those.
Oh, okay.
So that's right there where the Ickies used to be. They tore the Ickies down They took the Robert Taylor and Stateway Gardens down. And so the original plan for transformation was that they were going to build mixed income communities and walk up apartments and what they were going to do is they were going to bring those people that used to live in the high rises back along with higher income people, which I mean we all know that wasn't true, but they said it just so that they can get control over CHA. And what ended up happening was the opposite. I mean, they made it very, very difficult, almost impossible for those people to move back. And then when you see where the Marianos is at on 39th and King Drive, that used to be the Jane Addams homes. And so what they did was they created a TIF district in that area where they were able to use those funds to build the Marianos off of 39th and King. And pissed off a lot of people. And I know a group personally, the Chicago Housing Initiative, that actually created this ordinance called Keep the Promise Ordinance, which was designed to, um, stop, the city from engaging in public-private partnerships with uh, developers and actually start building affordable housing. But that didn't go. That didn't even make it out of committee.
Yeah, I think the also too the Outgale Gardens is it's still active.
Yeah, it's still
And the row houses of Cabrini Green is still there as well. They tore the high rises down, but they kept the row houses.
oh, okay. So I wanted to ask about when back with Fluky, like his influence on today, like where, like in the culture today. I saw like people like they do the gangster TV shows and things of that nature, but they don't really bring up like Flukey Stokes, or it was someone else I remember. Is it Iceberg Slim?
He
I
was a
don't.
pimp.
Was he a pimp? Okay, never
Mhm.
mind.
Well,
take
former
it. Take it
former
away.
pimp.
Take it away. But his influence, and do you think they don't talk about him a lot because he was involved in like the police and maybe politics and running, because he never ran a specific gang like you would say someone like Big Meech or something like that, right? He didn't run a specific gang that I could find. I was doing my research.
Well, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, please.
So, first, I have to say this. I don't think Fluky's been in the drug business as long as people that that get idolized. Like I mentioned earlier, Alpo Martinez. I mean, everybody's like talking about how this guy revolutionized the drug game in New York City and also Washington D.C. He doesn't get talked about like Leroy Nicky Barnes or even a Frank Lucas. And I feel like if he would have lived longer, you would hear a lot on in terms of in today's pop culture, but a lot of it has to do with he's not as well known as the guys that I just mentioned.
Okay, got it. And was Willie the Wimp, was he in the same business as his dad?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And it was really interesting. I started looking up, and of course, the most popular thing they bring up is the Cadillac coffin. But I think he had a daughter as well. Was it Sabrina? And they do a lot of tours of the grave just because of the Cadillac coffin and stuff. But I just really couldn't find so much of his influence. So now that makes sense, Big Mike. Like he wasn't as popular, but
But
he was legendary. Mhm.
Also, Chicago compared to New York City
Mhm.
wasn't it was a drug market, but it wasn't as big as New York City in terms of like the crack epidemic and the heroin epidemic of the 70s, because the Italians was running a lot of the New York drug space, and then you have folks like Frank Matthews and Frank Lucas and Leroy Nicky Barnes who were competing against the Italians, and eventually ended up taking over the drug market. Whereas in Chicago, you really didn't have from what I know, and I could be wrong about this, you really didn't have a strong hold of the drug market like it was in New York City. And that's because compared to Chicago, compared to New York City was a bigger drug market.
Yeah,
Mm.
and and if you look at New York also being a port city, it's on the ocean. You can float drugs over, from Mexico or whatever through that because it's on the Atlantic coast. Whereas um, coming into Chicago, you have to either fly in or drive it in, which is a little bit more riskier when you think about that. Also, too, now from my understanding as well, Flukey also got a hand from the mob here as well. Um, some people say that his connection with paying off the police is due to mob ties, Italian mob ties he had with the Italian mafia. I may be wrong about that, but that's kind of like what I heard.
Yeah, I think that sounds accurate. But also, all of this was going on during the era of John Burge, just so you
Yeah,
know.
exactly, exactly.
I was gonna ask. This was during the John Burge time too, right? Um.
And Daley was the state's attorney at that time as well.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That is I ran into one of the victims of in that situation, and they said they were actually coming out with a documentary. So I asked them to keep in touch so we could hear about it. Uh, Burge, that's another subject I would like to cover. That was something else, um, for sure. Um, Also, so Gardis, going back to, I didn't realize that Flukey Stokes, when you were saying his 30th anniversary, I thought it was 30th year in the game. His wedding anniversary, he spent that much money, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
go ahead.
No, no, no. Finish up.
But from what I was researching, and thank you guys, I appreciate y'all so much for having this conversation. They said that, and this goes to you and Big Mike. They said that actually he was having an affair, and that's the chauffeur was driving him to his mistress house, and that's how he got caught up.
Oh, you talking about when he was murdered?
Yeah.
I don't know exactly where he was going, but I know that they had set him up for him to get murdered because they wanted control of his drug empire. I can't really speak on if he was going to meet with a mistress or not, but I know exactly where he was murdered, and that was like around that was on off of 79th and Calumet, right by King Drive.
Yeah, and he was murdered by his. I think you mentioned it before, Mike. His bodyguard,
That-
Earl
mhm.
Wilson, who actually also later on found out he was also an informant. Uh, he was also an informant for the police. Kind of, and there was also somebody else who gave testimony against Flukey, a guy named Daryl Moore. Uh, and he actually was in jail for a previous crime, but they released him because of his testimony against Flukey. Uh, but then later on, after his release, he gets convicted of rape of an 11-year-old girl. So,
Dang. Oh my goodness. Mm.
And I did the inflation calendar. I mean the inflation calculator for $200,000 in 1985. That will be $500,000 now.
No.
So, so imagine spending the 30th wedding anniversary for $500,000. Wow.
That's something else. That is something else. Wow. And just for him. So Big Mike, well, a lot of people was saying was what you were saying. They thought that the bodyguard or the chauffeur set him up. Um, what makes people think that? Just because they would know his location, or
Well, if you go through the police records and you go through a lot of the court records, it's pretty obvious that he was on the phone with his killers. He was on the
mm,
phone, and then he was actually giving instructions on where they were going to be at a certain time when he was actually murdered.
hmm,
And like I said, when you are a flamboyant and when you have a multi-million-dollar drug empire, you become a target, and you have to be really careful. Even your closest people around you, you got to be very careful. And I think Flukey had his guard now, and that's ultimately what led to his demise.
yeah, and it probably is guards, especially losing his son 2 years earlier. It probably just you know he was
Yeah,
needing a
many
little.
people did say that Flukey's demeanor, changed after that, and that's why I say like the violence kind of ramped up after the death of his son. Um, I don't know if it was because of his son or maybe the situation that happened, because
Mm,
then his enemies started to get more bold about muscling in on his territory,
mm-hmm.
and it's no coincidence he dies 2 years after his son's death. So eventually it was going to come down to trying to get him, and unfortunately, like y'all said, he let his guard down because many of the people inside of uh Flukey's circle, I was just talking about Earl Wilson. He was an informant. He had several other people inside his organization who were kind of like informants, not just for the police, but for several of his you know rivals.
Hmm. And I wonder if it would be like so much because they like you're saying they couldn't have, after his son left, his son probably would have took over his empire, so they had to get rid of both of them. That's so sad. Mm. So
Even if his son was alive,
mm-hmm.
they still would try to take over.
Okay.
This isn't
Yeah,
like this, and I don't mean to sound quite harsh, but it's not like when you run a legally organized business where if you pass on, your kids automatically take it. No, this is like street type of work where if the head person is gone, you're gonna have people trying to compete, and the strongest is the one that gets it.
yeah, yeah. I'm not sure if his son was as had a large figure like his father was. So yeah, I agree that they probably still would have tried to kill him as well, even if his father left before him, they would have probably killed him too, trying to run the drug business. Because, like I said, the unique thing about Flukey, he lived until he was 48.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see how like Big Mike, how you were able to tie in the projects and CHA and how it hit us out here in the suburbs. That whole transformation. So this was really this was interesting because now I'm like just putting it together, like you were saying, the different floors and how things were being ran, and how the new gentleman that was running CHA, how that affected us all the way today.
Well, he actually got convicted. I think Vincent Lane. I know he was eventually fired,
Mm-hmm.
but I think he was also convicted as well for some under the table wrongdoing.
Mm.
But I know for sure that the residents of CHA sued him for um, violating their Fourth Amendment right, even though he was doing it for the right purpose, but the way he went about it was wrong.
Yeah. It said, I think I'm reading it correct. He was once heralded a visionary, Vincent Lane. He was sentenced to 2.5 years for lying to banks. He was ex CHA chief gets prison article. Yeah.
He wasn't as bad as Charles Weibel. Charles Weibel was ruthless. He
Mm.
was Charles Weibel was a James Byrne appointee,
Okay.
and I think he was either fired by Harold Washington or he was told by Harold Washington that he needed to put in a resignation, and then he eventually resigned. I forgot how that went down, but Charles Weibel was accepting bribes from gang leaders, from drug dealers, and would turn the other way. He was, he under his watch. That's when you started seeing CHA buildings start to deteriorate because he wasn't spending the money appropriately to, work on the maintenance of those buildings. And then on top of that, you got to understand too, this is the 1980s under the Reagan administration. Tax cuts on social programs was going on at that time. And, you know, uh, governments all over that housed the poor were affected. This is the midst of supply side economics, which is the trickle down economics perspective of you give the rich tax cuts that they're gonna be able to bring down that prosperity to all other classes.
True. Um, I want to read Scott's comment. He said, take Durham, North Carolina, for example. They bulldozed the Haiti community, built HUD brick apartment units, and told them it was temporary housing. And that's when IBM was built. Jobs would be provided to the residents. They destroyed an entire black community to build an expressway to connect to Durham. I-40. Wow. I never heard of that, Scott. Thanks for sharing.
Sounds like it's eminent domain, which is how Chicago downtown was created.
Yeah, and I remember there was a book that came out about highways being part of the gentrification process because that's how they got a lot of blacks out on places like the West Coast. You know, building a lot of highways, and just like Mike said, eminent domain to build highways straight through projects, straight through all black communities. Um, but I mean, that's what, governments do. And if I'm not mistaken, one of the first uh, all black communities that I know that was taken by eminent domain was the Pentagon. Because if I can recall, there was an all black community that was there, and then they had to build the Pentagon and move all those people out.
Mm. I keep on hearing intimate domain now that I'm out here, and people are like, they're trying to get my house by intimate domain. So I would like to learn more about that. That is interesting.
It's not as so it's not like it is in the past where the government can just come in and just take your house. There's a formal process, and oftentimes, if it is eminent domain, the homeowner would get paid the value, or oftentimes more value, more than the value of their home for if that was the case. You know, back in the past, like when Richie Daley was doing eminent domain to build UIC, University of Illinois in Chicago on the west side, that area used to be occupied by the Italians, the Polish, and I forgot the other ethnic group that used to be over there. But what they did was they would just take the property and they wouldn't pay for it.
Mm.
That's illegal. You can't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Governments can't do that anymore. They have to. There's a whole process that goes with that.
Mm. Man, it is something. Government politics come in a lot of different forms, and I'm learning it's politics in everything, even in like gang culture. So I appreciate y'all. Thank you so much. You have any final words about Flukey Stokes? We've been on there an hour. I appreciate y'all. Any final words? Okay. Well, that's it.
I was giving it to Mike to see if
Okay.
he wants to say something first.
Okay.
Oh, well, I appreciate you actually speaking about Fluky, doing a live stream on Fluky Stokes. Not many people do live streams on Fluky. They do it. I mean, I see it all the time with other drug dealers that are not Chicago bound.
hmm
So I think this is education that a lot of people will be able to benefit from in terms of learning about how the drug culture in Chicago was back in the day. And so and Fluky played a tremendous role in that. Um, and it's also an opportunity to see how politics is intertwined with drug and gangs and housing and how that affects today. So, yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. I appreciate you giving me education because I was really, both of you, I was really confused. Like, wait, which is the son and how did this go? And so thank you so much.
Yeah, Fluky's a very interesting character. Um, he's a very contradictory character. Obviously, many can praise him for his business acumen, being in the drug game so long. But then at the same time, he was destroying the black community. And, you know, uh, drugs never progressed the black community like that. So, he and Fluky basically kind of symbolized um, the gross capitalism that plagued our community. When you think about getting money because of the fact that many policies that were put in place that left blacks destitute, forcing them to live in projects and certain areas. Uh, you get this flourishing of crime and drug dealing and gang culture because of the fact that resources aren't being put into these communities. Nothing productive is being put in. Jobs were not being built. Businesses were staying away from these communities, and the underground economy was the only way to make money. And so you get a person like Flukey Stokes that can rise up because of the fact that blacks didn't have you know much to go on. So um Fluky basically represents a lot of things. Um some good, mostly bad, because of the fact that he represents a stinging indictment of how society, how this drug game affected black folks back then, and it still affects us now, and why we are in the conditions we are in, because unfortunately, we don't control the politics, we don't control the resources. Some of us don't even control our own lives. So, um, and then you get something like what's happening out here in the Southland, and not just here, but several other places where blacks live at, where they try to lash out at the political structure, but it's just basically a group of people who are just desperate. And when you're desperate, you do anything to draw some attention to your pain and suffering.
We,
Well
we,
said.
we didn't talk about this, but I would like to say this. There was one gang leader that tried to get into the political process, and that gang leader was Larry Hoover. And he created he had created the GDs, of course, Gangster Disciples. But a lot of people don't know this, but he also created the Growth and Development Project, which was designed to get his members to vote. And he was a big reader. He was a voracious reader with Mike Rocchio's book, Boss. Boss is a book that was written about Mayor Daley and how the father Daley and how he was able to mobilize his gang to get into politics, and how they were able to utilize the connections of Big Bill Thompson, who was the governor, or not governor, I'm sorry, the mayor back in the 1930s and 40s, to be able to clench political power. So Larry Hoover created the Growth and Development Project to register hundreds of thousands of his members to vote. I just find it ironic, though, that in 1995 they immediately hit him with RICO charges when he was getting this up and going off the ground. It just was really interesting how the whole process went. And I don't know if that was like a threat to the political machine, but it's just really interesting. And I bring this up because there have been times in the past where other ethnic groups were successful in using gangs to get more involved in politics. But when it comes down to the African American community being able to use gangs to get involved, it never works. It never works.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I think what was it called, the 21st Century project?
Yeah. I think it's under his growth. He also, yeah, I think that's what it is. Yeah.
So has it worked like you were saying it never works for black people? Has it worked for like have different like cultures like Republicans or something like that been
It's
able
not.
to get
It's not about based on party. I mean,
mhm.
and I'll tell people this all the time. Chicago is all racial. It's racial. There's always
Mhm.
going to be the Democratic Party that's going to run it. It's all about who is in charge. And I think that you know W.E.B. Du Bois was right about one thing that he said, and he said that every era in American history, the issues are always going to come down to the color line. And that means who's in charge, like black, white, Hispanic, and especially in Chicago. And so the Irish was able to use the Hamburg Club to be able to elevate their way to political power. And the Hamburg Club is just another way of saying the gang, but they call it the athletic clubs back in the 1920s, the 30s, and the 40s. And before that, you had the Polish that was able to do it. And you have other ethnic groups as well that were successful in other, cities. But when it comes to black gangs being able to do it, we've seen this with Jeff Ford and the Black Peace Stones, and Larry Hoover and the GDs. It never worked. And um, they end up somehow at ADX while Richie Daley ends up at City Hall, and they virtually did the same thing. I mean, like Hamburg's clubs, they murdered people, they did all those things.
And if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Daly part of the Hamburg Club?
He was the leader. He was the president of it.
Yep.
And it's interesting because no one really talks about this, but his involvement is very, very secretive in the 1919 race riots. No one knows exactly what he did or if he actually, you know, participated in a lot of racially involved incidents. And that was during the time when he was the leader of the Hamburg Club. But to understand that, you know, gangs are ingrained in Chicago political culture because that was a way that you can use to get involved in the political process. The political machines were run like gangs. And when Daley became mayor in 55, that's exactly what he did. He took the Hamburg athletic club system and turned it into the Chicago political machine.
So that's like the Chicago Athletic Club, right? I see that all the time.
Um, a little different. I have to do some research on that,
Okay.
but I just know that in the past, when you hear people talk about the athletic club, they're basically talking. It would be considered a game today.
Okay. Okay.
It's
Okay.
their version of the game, you know, just
Yeah,
like.
it's the white gang.
But my point is that, you know, it worked for every other ethnic group, but when it comes down to black gangs, it never works.
Mm. I'm thinking about now. I have a lot of people saying the book Boss Daily by Lance Williams. So that might be something interesting read for us, y'all.
Yes, King David and Boss Daly. Lance Williams is he's a very good Chicago street historian. Um, I think he teaches at, if I'm not mistaken, I think he teaches at University of Chicago as well. Um, if not, I think he did before, but he has a lot of books. Well, not a lot, but he has a couple of books. He also has a book about the Black Keystone Rangers as well. Um, and some interesting Chicago history in that Boss Daly, King David and Boss Daly book that he talks about with the Black disciples and Old Man
Okay.
David.
So you're talking about David Barksdale.
Yeah. Yep.
Which it's interesting because David Barksdale and Larry Hoover actually combined their gangs because David Barksdale actually died from health complications. And before he died, Larry Hoover actually worked with David Barstow to combine both of their gangs.
Hmm. Okay. Well, thanks, y'all. I'm telling you, I'm learning over here. Every time you guys come up here and tell me anything, it like brings me down. it like it just tumbles me down to want to learn more. So I appreciate you so much because I do want to thank you for bringing up the Larry Hoover being into politics. Now I want to look into that more. And is that the reason? I don't know the reason they're holding him so long. I never looked into it, but is a lot of it political? What is it? I don't know. Um.
It's political, and I wouldn't say it's political. It's well now it's not. I mean he's like in his 70s or 80s now.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
74.
And so I think a lot of it has to do with um, the fact that they feel like he's going to come out and create the same organization that he once did to do more havoc. In my opinion, I think that's what it is. But I'm telling you, the way how these gangs are today, new generation running them, I don't think he would have any influence.
Mm.
Definitely agree. I mean, some of these, I talked to some of them and they're like, who? And literally they wouldn't care if he did come out. So I agree. He wouldn't have much influence on the streets as far as the young gangs. Now, maybe some of the old heads who are sitting behind the scenes, they know who he is and they'll probably respect him. But um, the way some of these youngsters run these gangs and these territories, they probably might want to shoot him just to get a rep.
Mm. Yeah. And Don said Union League as well. Union League. Okay. Well, thank you, y'all. I appreciate y'all so much for coming on. I hope we can have the next conversation about Big Daily and Little Daily, or we say Daddy Daily or Old Man Daily and Daily Junior. And I'm really intrigued about Jesse Jackson and Jesse Jackson Jr. I see that now that it's like during the election time, they're pushing Jesse Jackson Jr. out there more now that he's free, and I always wonder if it's just a name, or because I'm like, Jonathan's a whole state rep, so I want to have a conversation about that too.
Yeah,
Sure.
I agree. One of the topics you might want to write down is uh, when Jesse Jackson Sr. ran for president.
Hmm.
To me, and we're not going to talk about it now because that would have been the whole conversation. But to me, that was probably the closest America came to looking at a possible third party.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, Jesse kind of backed down and stepped away, and then his supporters just supported the Democratic Party.
Wait, I got a question about that. Because most people would think Ross Perot in '92 came close to that. What do you think about Ross Perot?
So Ross Perot, you know what? I don't think Ross Perot would have successfully. Well, I mean, obviously, we all know that Ross Perot was just there to take votes away from Bush, but no, I think Ross Perot was much more of a Republican than anything. Um, that was just my take on him, because I was thinking, that was actually the first time I was legally ever to vote for a presidential election. And I thought about voting for Ross Perot at one point. And then when I saw some of his policies, I was like, okay, it looks too Bush-like. So,
Uh, I think he'd be a libertarian today, though.
well, see, that's the thing about it. I kind of, they're just basically offshoots of Republicans to me.
Well, some of their policies, I would say, oh, well, yeah, we'll have a conversation about
Yeah, we
that.
got to have a conversation about that later.
I'm writing it on the list.
But I do want to like talk about like later though, whenever we have these again. I want to be able to compare different daily administrations, the father and the son, and how that impacted not just Chicago but the entire state. Because um, I think that both dailies had a tremendous impact on how politics is what it is today.
Yep, I'd be down for that conversation.
And it's so funny because Daly keeps a low profile now. I wonder if he works behind the scene in any kind of way. That is interesting.
I think he was. If you want to know my opinion on it, I think he was told to step down and keep a low profile, especially after that hired truck scandal in the mid 2000s.
Mm.
I kind of agree with him. I think he was forced into not running again.
Hmm. Okay. Well, thanks, gentlemen. I appreciate you so much. Thanks for being long winded with me.
No problem. No problem.
And I'll send an email again and see when we can get back together.
Anytime.
Okay. Thank you, Big Mike. Thank you, Gardis Watts. You guys, let's put the blue hearts in the chat for Gardis Watts and Big Mike. And you, gentlemen, have a great evening.
You as well. Take
You
care.
do.
Okay.
Thank you.
That was a really cool conversation. I'm so busy taking notes. I learned so much from Gardis and Big Mike, and it's I knew nothing about politics. Nothing. I knew you vote for the president, you you vote for where you live, and that's it. And now and basically, like, I'm just gonna say it, where I grew up, the way I grew up, it was like, okay, you're black, so you're Democrat. So it was not until I got a little older and started to look into, like I told you, voting in Dalton. I went straight to, okay, here's the card, and I just punch all these numbers. So now getting older, and especially when I got to work under the Shaws and learning a little bit more about politics. That way, I learned to really look into my candidate and who was behind my candidate. And now I'm seeing so much, like, talking about Chicago culture. Like, who would have thought Flukey Stokes, he ran this building and he was able to have the police and the CHA know his business, and they didn't care as long as their pockets were, allegedly filled. So, who else knew? Who else knew? What ald? I should have asked Big Mike this. Oh, I should have asked Gardis this. What alderman did he have in his pocket allegedly? You know what I mean? Learning all this stuff, like, who was the alderman over the Robert Taylor homes, or, I forgot to ask that question. I'm sitting here now thinking about it. Dang it. Um, a lot of people know what's going on, and the residents are the only ones, or the people in the neighborhood are the last to know. So that was our show on Flukey Stokes and a little bit of politics. I thank y'all for staying with us, and I'll be putting things up on my community wall, like a little photo tribute of Flukey Stokes. And I appreciate all the footage I was able to find on YouTube. I will credit them in the description box. And as always, you guys take care of yourself and each other. I appreciate y'all for sticking with us. Bye.
Commentary blue, commentary, burgundy, commentary, commentary blue.